Hey guys, welcome back to A2 Audio. Today on the channel we're going to be taking a look at this Harman Kardon 430 Twin, and this was actually sent to me from one of my subscribers. Everybody say hello Ray, hello Ray, and he asked me to restore this receiver and get it back up to good condition. And so I've gone ahead and done a full restore on this, and so what I did was I recapped the entire receiver. I've also changed out all the transistors. This unit and the 730 has some of the common transistors, and they suffer from the dreaded black-legged transistor rot. And so if you remember in a previous video on the 730, when I was taking apart some of those transistors, as soon as I pulled them out, they were falling apart. And so this unit also suffered from that. I didn't have any catastrophic failures when I pulled those transistors out, but you could tell as on the legs themselves, that black was creeping up closer and closer to the silicone inside the top of the transistor. So it's a good thing we went ahead and did this. And so I've redone all the boards on this receiver with new transistors and capacitors. The only board I haven't touched or recapped or did transistors on was the tuner board. Now when this unit was given to me, when I opened it up inside, someone had been inside before and it looked like they had done a light job on it. And so they kind of did good work in some areas and crappy work in other areas. And one of the things they did, and I'm not sure why, but they removed the stereo light. And so that was one of the things that Ray was complaining about, is that the stereo light didn't work. And I'll be honest with you, I have several 430s and I've never really looked at them to make sure that they came with a stereo light. So after I saw that this one didn't have one, I decided to go ahead and crack open one of those other stereos that I had, the 430s, and sure enough, they have a stereo light, which, you know, I assumed they did, but I just thought maybe I was missing something, so I wanted to double check. So for whatever reason, someone took out the stereo light in this receiver and never replaced it. And so I didn't know if that was because they couldn't fix it or they couldn't there was a problem with the tuner. And so after I get all this work done to it and get all the lights done to it, I went ahead and started testing everything, and I tested the tape, I tested the auxiliary, and then I tested the FM. And when I switched from the auxiliary to the FM was significantly lower volume than what either one of the other inputs from tape or auxiliary were from. And so I instantly knew that there was an issue with the FM board or something going on in that FM circuit as to why the volume was so low. Now it would pull in stations, however I could not get the stereo light to light, and I couldn't get really any readings from the signal meter here. And as you can tell now, both the stereo light is reading and the meter is working. And so I decided to reach out to the subscriber, the customer who had dropped off the unit, Ray, and ask him, hey, tell me a little bit more about this. Was the FM working when you brought it here? Were you having any issues with it? And so he told me that, yeah, it was working fine. He didn't notice any issues with it. However, I was noticing quite a few issues. And so I didn't know whether I had done something while I was in the receiver, or if it was that way and no one ever noticed it. So I decided to take a deeper dive into it, and I want to walk you guys through the process of what I did to diagnose and fix this. And so if you remember, I did a short video on this receiver, and I showed you guys the boards of the receiver themselves. And so there was no markings on any of the boards. So we didn't know the pinout for transistors, we didn't know the polarity of capacitors. And so that was going to be a huge undertaking, because you would have to be super careful when you swapped out all these components. And I did it, and I tested everything, and everything was working great. The only problem was the FM circuit. So I didn't know if that was a problem of my own creating or if it had come to me that way. So with that in mind, I started to do some diagnosing. Now I've gotten a lot of requests for me to do videos like this where I'll walk through how I diagnose a receiver and kind of walk through what I do to fix it. And so I've already fixed this receiver, but I felt like it was important enough to show you guys kind of my thought process and what I did to get to this point and to fix it and get that FM working right. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking about what we did to get this right. I'm going to bring you guys in closer. We'll take a look at the schematic, and I'll go ahead and show you guys my train of thought to get this thing working right. So without further ado, come on in, let's get started. All right, so one of the first things I did to diagnose this is I wanted to see if anybody had come across this problem before. And so I turned to the internet. I think a lot of us YouTubers feel like we can't show this step because we want to make sure that people think we have all the answers. And the simple fact is there's a lot of stereos out there, and I don't have all the answers. And so chances are someone has come across this problem before or experienced it before, and maybe that'll give me a leg up or a head start in diagnosing my receiver. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes you can't find any literature or any information on it, but you'll never know if you don't check. So one of the first things I did was go in here to my search engine and type in Harman Kardon 430 Twin FM very quiet. And usually what I'm looking for is a thread from Audio Karma. And if you're not familiar with Audio Karma, if you go to audiokarma.org, it's a great resource for all different types of receivers from the vintage eras and even some of the newer stuff too. And they just have a wealth of knowledge. And you've got some really, really knowledgeable, experienced former techs on there, or people that just like helping other people. And so it's a really great site and resource. So if you're not familiar with that and you've got an issue, go check it out. So I started looking through, and lo and behold, one of the first threads on here is from Audio Karma. And so I went ahead and opened it up. And once I do, it brings me to this thread here. And title is Harman Kardon 430 receiver, FM volume is low in comparison to aux and phono. So that's my exact problem that I'm having. And so I thought there would be some really good information in here, but it's actually a short thread. There's only 3 posts in here. But one of the gentleman that responded to this is called D. Lucy. And if you're familiar with him, he's put up some great resources for this receiver, for the 730, the 930, and the 630 on Audio Karma. And I've used some of his resources before when I was recapping and doing the transistors. Now, I did change up some of his suggestions and put what I thought were better suggestions for some of the transistor subs, but he gave me a great resource, and he's given a lot of people really a great resource. So if you're ever trying to rebuild one of these on your own, make sure you go to audiokarma.org, because he's really giving you a leg up. So in his response is basically, if you look here, he's talking about a chip called the BA1310, which is kind of notorious for various problems. And so he says that might be a good place to start. And, and then he refers to page 8 of the 430 service manual. Now, you guys know I'm a sucker for having an original service manual. So as soon as I saw this, I was giddy, because now he's telling me exactly where to go to check voltages. And so sure enough, I can pull up that service manual and look at those voltages. And so, again, don't forget to use your resources. I think doing an internet search and seeing if other people have come across this problem before is a great way to save yourself some time, especially if you're fixing these things, as many of them as I am. Time is a resource, and we don't have a lot of it. So this is the very first thing I did, and I think it's important us YouTubers are being honest with how we go about fixing things. So without further ado, let's go back over to the receiver and take a look at the receiver and the schematic. All right, so here we are back at the receiver, and as you can see on this side, I've got my manual, and sure enough, on page 8, it gives voltages for all the things we'll be looking at. And so we're going to be concerning ourselves with this IC chip here, that BA1310. And so if we look on here, that the voltages are listed under IC301 for this chip. And so what I'm going to do, let me zoom you guys in, and I'll walk through this. Get a real good picture here. Look at this chip. And this chip has 14 pins on it. So we got 7 on this side and 7 on this back side that you guys can't see because of the camera angle. So what I did was get my multimeter out, and my negative lead I attached to ground here, and then my positive I just started hitting all these pins up and verifying what the voltages were. And so every voltage starting from pin 1 all the way through was not right. I mean, I was either getting half the voltage I was supposed to get, or no voltage at all, or just not within what I would call the margin of error for this to be correct. So somewhere along the line I just wasn't getting enough voltage to this chip. And so I know from doing previous videos and working on FMs, most of these boards have somewhere between 12 and 13 volts coming into them to power these boards. And so when I looked at this chip, pin 6, which is this pin here, should have been getting around 12.5 volts. And I was getting about half of that. And so I was curious. I was like, well, if that's where almost 13 volts is going into this pin, because it actually comes down here somewhere into one of these clips. I wonder if that's where the power goes into this. And so from there, I decided to look at the transistor over here and see, because this transistor feeds some of these pins over here. And I was getting about half the voltage I needed to get here. And so then I'm kind of wondering, I was like, well, maybe I'm just not getting enough voltage for this amplifier section of the FM circuit, and that's why the volume is so low. And so then I started thinking, well, maybe there's a bad resistor or something that's being funky, or a cap that's going bad or whatnot. But I didn't want to start pulling components out and checking them until I had a really good chance to think about it and look at the schematic. So after I took all the readings from this chip, I came to the conclusion I just wasn't getting the right voltage. So then I went back to the schematic. So let me zoom you guys back out, and then we're going to move the receiver out, and we're going to talk about what I found in the schematic itself. And so that's one of the benefits I like to having the original service manual, is because you get a lot clearer pictures when you're talking about the service manual itself. So let me move you guys over to where we can talk about this. All right, so here's that tuning circuit here, and then this is the chip right here. And you can see it's a little bit backwards on the schematic, but pin 1 is over here. So pin 1 all the way to pin 6. So pin 6, I noticed that when I followed this and I went around, it goes right to this resistor and comes right out at one of the connectors. It's CO2. And it's part of the B+3 that's coming out of one of these bridge rectifiers, and specifically one of the sub-rectifier boards on the back of the receiver. And I'll put a picture up on the screen so you know what I'm talking about down here. And that's where that B+ comes out of. And when I look over the voltages from there, that B+ is supposed to be around, let me just check, 12.5 volts. So that's what's feeding the board. And so that B+ comes into two places. It comes in here, but it also comes in over here into the FM-IF as well. So that means that both of these, this is really one board, but both of these circuits are not getting fed the correct voltages. And so now I know that it's not something that was on the tuner board itself. It directed me to start looking or thinking about this sub-rectifier board. And so now the sub-rectifier board is pretty straightforward. There's not a lot on the board itself. And so I knew that I'd already done the capacitors and transistors on that board. So, if we look here, this B+, this 13 volts comes right off the leg of the emitter of this transistor. So then I decided, well, hey, let me go look and make sure that I didn't goof something up and the pinout is wrong on this transistor. So once I started to do that, I realized that the pinout was correct and I couldn't find any problems. So then I decided to continue to look at it and wanted to look at the actual circuit board itself. Let me get to that page here. And that's this board here. And so that transistor is sitting right here, and the emitter is right here on that transistor. And as you can see, we've got our bridge rectifier, their diode, and then this emitter leg goes to the negative side of this capacitor, the negative side of this capacitor. We have a diode here, and then it comes out. We have another capacitor here, and it goes through the negative side of that capacitor, and then out here, which feeds both the FM-IM circuit that we were talking about and also that MPX chip, that IC301 or BA1310 chip that we were talking about the problem. So I wanted to go ahead and do a deeper dive into this. And so when I started looking at the circuit or the sub-bridge rectifier board, I was checking all my components and making sure I had everything right. So I went through the transistor here, that's incorrectly. Looked at this capacitor, that's incorrectly. Looked at this capacitor, that's incorrectly. And then I got to this capacitor, and I realized the polarity on this capacitor was backwards. And so instantly I knew that I had made a goof up when I plugged in my capacitor. And so I had the positive polarity on this side and the negative polarity on this side. So backwards in the board. But obviously I didn't realize that because of the problem that none of the boards are marked. And so out of everything that I've done, I made one mistake, and that one mistake had repercussions that I didn't realize was going to happen. And so as soon as I pulled out this capacitor, and I actually changed the capacitor out because I noticed that there was a slight bulge on this capacitor after that, or at least what I thought might be a slight bulge, and I just didn't want to risk it. So I put a brand new capacitor and made sure the polarity was correct. As soon as I did that, the FM was working perfectly. I was getting my 13 volts on that chip. All the other voltages on that chip was correct. My stereo light started working as well. So I really hope, I know this wasn't a huge long video, but I really hope that y'all seeing that train of thought is kind of like helps you to troubleshoot some of the circuits yourself. And sometimes it's that easy. Sometimes it might take a long time to dive in and look at these things. But it all started with me going and doing an internet search and then following some of the advice. Now, ultimately, the FM circuit had nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't getting enough power to feed the circuit to really be able to amplify the signal enough. And that's why there was a disparity in the sound that was going out of my aux and tape channels versus what was coming out of the FM circuit. And so by being able to do that, and then basically identifying where there's a problem, and then going back a step, and then back another step to get to this sub-rectifier board, and finding out it was just one capacitor that was in backwards. And so that's why it's so important to be able to think through these things and then be able to look at a schematic and kind of follow the problem. And sometimes, like, none of the voltages are on here were correct. And so just having that little bit of knowledge of knowing that these boards should have somewhere around 13 volts coming in kind of led me to that. And once I realized that that was going directly to the source, I was able to check to ensure that we had 13 volts coming out of that source. And usually on other receivers, they won't have a sub-rectifier board. This will all be one board, and it'll be the power supply board. And you'll always notice, at least especially in Pioneers and Realistics that I've noticed, it's always around 13 volts. It's coming. They have one leg coming out of the power supply board, in this instance the sub-rectifier board that feeds that FM AM circuit. And so that's one of the first steps I will always recommend when we're trying to troubleshoot this, is make sure that we've got our 13 volts coming out. And in this case we didn't, and it was just a simple capacitor in the wrong polarity, and it made all the difference in the world for getting the circuit correct and getting things working. So now this unit is ready to rock and roll. And I learned something. And that's ultimately what's possible, or what's important, is that we learn something, and hopefully we won't repeat that mistake again. So let's take a look at the actual sub-rectifier here board. And let me see if I can get a really good camera view for you guys. So we can see exactly what we were talking about. And so this is a sub-rectifier board up here, and this is the transistor, and this transistor is EBC. And so E is on this far side over here, which that trace circles back around and comes through this capacitor and out here. I'm sorry, out over here. And it's that 13 volts that goes. And so this basically, this capacitor here was what was the polarity was backwards in it. And so when you're changing as many components out is what I have done in this board, all the capacitors, all the transistors, all it can take is just one simple mispolarity to cause you a problem. And so that's why it's so important to be fresh when you're doing this, and then take advantage of, especially when the circuit board has printing and labeling on it. And it's a good chance that if this board would have had printing and label on it, I wouldn't have made that mistake. But nonetheless, I made a mistake, and I was able to diagnose it and troubleshoot it and get it back to working. And so I hope this I hope you guys got some value out of this, and it kind of just teaches you how to troubleshoot or how to think through a problem, and then ultimately use the internet and use your tools and your resources to your advantage. And so don't start diving into it until you've done your homework. Make sure you're going to resources like Audio Karma, or maybe you have a friend that does this and you can use their knowledge as well. But that's usually the first step, is doing your homework and thinking through this before we start pulling out components. Because if I'd have just started pulling out components on that tuner board, I would have never arrived to the real problem, which is right here. You know, the root cause of the problem was this capacitor. If I would have started basically plugging and chugging components from that tuner board and hoping I get lucky. So thanks for watching. And if you got something out of this, make sure to leave me a comment down below. If you got questions, leave me a comment down below. But now this thing is ready to rock and roll, so we're going to put it back together, clean it up, and this thing's ready to go back to Ray. So Ray, thank you for the opportunity to work on your receiver. You've got a beautiful 430 twin coming back to you. And anybody else, if you have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comments below. Again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video, guys.